Who's taken on the clip?
Thank you. I'll do that. Oh, can you just share the
So what I'm going to talk about today
Started a bit early.
is I'm going to utilise the crystal ball, and we're going to talk about the next couple of years, but looking after 2026, because I'm sure that everybody is absolutely sick and tired of the FASEA advisor exam and the education processes and everything else like that. So we will talk about where I see business going and what else is going on. Am I right to go? So today's agenda, the landscape. Hello, there shall be light. Advisor numbers, the FASEA education and experience advisor pathway. QA outcomes, and you've just got to love a good TLA. I mean, having a review is one thing, but having a good TLA that just rolls off the tongue like QA does makes it so much more efficient. And as a result of the QA, advice documents, general advice, and I've got a bit of a case study about general advice and why advisors will find it hard to win at AFCA. Asset regulatory issues, compensation changes, TMDs, some cyber security. And it's funny because as part of my changing role with Sequoia, I don't get to speak to as many advisors day in, day out as I used to. But I reckon over the last month, I've taken 90% of my calls have been about cyber security. So I thought I'd better put something in. And if there's any other issues to discuss, because I normally go 50% overtime anyway. The industry landscape, advisor numbers. So they went from approximately 17,500 advisors in 2015 up to the peak in 2019 of 26,000. But by the end of September 22, that had fallen to 16,203. And the first 2 weeks of October, we actually saw triple-digit falls because useless AFSLs that couldn't get their active year were too slow to take advisors off that needed to come off at the 30th of September. And so there was that overhang. And the numbers are now below 16,000, so they're in the 15. From the peak, advisor numbers in practice reduced by only 14%. And Libertas has reduced closer to the average of 39%, which is one of the reasons why we're bringing Phil on board and with his network of people to look to regrow the Libertas brand. Why? Well, the FASEA exam, the ASIC advisor levy. And again today I got asked the question, just like I did in WA, you know, what about this advisor levy? How does it make up? What does it do for us? Well, the answer to that is absolutely nothing. So the ASIC advisor levy is that ASIC are required by Treasury to get advisors to fund ASIC's suing of Westpac and AMB and all of the other big firms so that they can impose ridiculous corporate penalties on them. And that money doesn't go back to ASIC, it goes into consolidated revenue, which allows Albanese to make false claims about what he's going to do in the economy to get elected. And then in the end, ASIC becomes underfunded to do all of the different things that they now do. So, you know, ASIC, and I go back to when it was the Australian Securities Commission and the Investments Commission. And I was on the working panel that established ASIC at the time for the industry. Now, you look at what ASIC is trying to regulate. So it's not just all of the corporations law and all of the companies and all of the businesses. They've taken on the TPP, they've taken on FASEA, and they've taken on a huge supervision of the ASX. And they're trying to do that with less money, but yet they are still hitting us with increased advisor levies And as I said, it is all just going to the government. And the final one was the lack of interest in meeting the PSEA exam targets. Depending on who you listen to, without any structural change, 85% of advisors will meet education target, and we'll have 13,600 advisors by 2026. And those figures are brought to you by the biggest self-interest lobby in the industry, which is the education side of it, because if they reckon that 85% of people are going to meet the, or 85% of advisors are going to meet education targets, they're living in cloud cuckoo land. Okay? But we have to put that in as the best case. 33% of advisors will depart the industry in lieu of meeting education standards, which means that we'll have 10,700 advisors by 2026. This is the mid case. Or we will continue a net loss of 14%, and by 2029, the end of this decade, we'll have just 4,000 advisors left. Now, nobody is seriously stating that the new advisors entering the industry will noticeably impact on changes. And that's really important, because we've no longer got organisations that can afford to run schools, to handle 20 or 30 people at a time going through a PY year. It is being left to small businesses to fund their and to implement their PY year for their succession planning. And we just cannot reach and make any noticeable difference to the advisor numbers landscape. But this is the positive side of it. If you're already qualified by 1/1/26, then the opportunities, regardless of any changes to the landscape, will be significant. So those people who meet the PSEA targets by 2026, your client base is going to change. There's no two ways about it, but it will have a positive income effect. The opportunity to transition to providing strategic advice on a fee-for-service basis to clients who are willing to pay the service is the goal. And the laws of supply and demand, regardless of whether it's the best case or the medium case or the worst case, there will be a demand for clients or by clients or advisors who are prepared to give and who are in a position to give strategic advice on a fee-for-service basis. And that is the big opportunity. If you're not in that case, then you're going to need to rely on politicians meeting their election promises of providing an experience pathway. Now, I don't know about you, but the thought of leaving things to politicians to meet election promises doesn't fill me with a whole lot. You know, we've seen it before in this industry. We had Fat Guts Palmer and that person from Tasmania, Landy, okay? And when the changes to the legislation came through in 2015, okay, that would have been sensible changes to FOCA and best interest, they got in and overrode those changes simply because they were pissed off at the government for something else. So, you know, we've got to be wary of trusting the politicians. The only good thing is that in this particular case, both sides of politics have said that an experience pathway is needed. But again, if it comes through, you're going to be in a situation where your client base will change and you'll be transitioning to fee-for-service strategic advice. But we just need the self-interest groups to stay out, to keep out of the way. I mean, you've got the FPA, the AFA, particularly the FSC. You know, they are all self-interest groups that none of them have your interest at heart. Okay, and together with the education lobby, they just need, and AFCA is the other one, it's a self-interest group in this. Without them being kept out of the way, we're going to find it hard to get a successful experience pathway through. So, the Treasury Financial Advisor Education Standard, anyway, that paper, August 2022, proposed that the category of existing advisors on the FAR register as at 1/1/2019 and having completed the CF advisor exam by 1/10/2022 should have a subgroup of experienced advisors with a proposed 10 years of full-time equivalent experience in Australia between 1/1/2004 and 1/1/2019 and have a clean disciplinary record. Yeah, on the surface, that sounds really good. And, you know, it's a sensible approach to the issue because without the structural changes to the advisors, we just won't have enough advisors by 2026. But the issues with this, how do you document the experience requirement? Because remember, 2015, when the FAR register came on board, was the first time that a lot of advisors who were actually giving advice became registered on the ASIC register. Why? Because the institutions didn't even know who was giving advice on their behalf at times, and so they kept all of these people just simply as representatives, and they didn't get included on the FAR register. And Anya, who spends half her life trawling through the FAR register looking for the stuff on advisors, will tell me that there are numerous problems with the FAR register because in 2015 we had to sit down and put everybody on that had been giving advice. And so you've got people who have legitimately been given advice since 2004 who may not have been entered onto the FAR register in 2015, and it will be very, very difficult to then prove that they were giving advice in Australia to meet the experience requirement. The second question is, should it have a sunset clause? Bloody hope it should. An experience pathway like this is not designed for somebody who comes into the industry in 2004 at the ripe old age of 24 and doesn't study, doesn't take advantage of anything like that, and gets a free pass on the experience pathway, but then has 30 years still in front of them giving advice. This is to counter for the fact that there are a lot of older people who don't have the time nor the inclination and run big businesses to go back to university and do a course of study for a short rest of their advice period. So yes, it will need to have a sunset clause, but it needs to probably have that sunset clause date from 2026, not from 2019. And how do you demonstrate a clean record? Well, you know, the logical thing would be to say that, oh, if you haven't been banned by ASIC or had an enforceable undertaking, but up until we started to look at the problems with the GFC and then the Royal Commission, you had to be almost a serial killer to be banned. Now, you know, you look the wrong way and you can be banned for 3 years. But up until that time, and so, and this is again where the self-interest groups come in, AFCA say that they want to be the sole arbiter of who has a clean record and who doesn't. And the big problem with that is that for the last 20 years, institutions have taken a risk management approach to complaints of AFCA. And if it's worth less to them to pay it out than just pay out the fine, they'll do so. And what that means is that complaint then gets reported against the advisor, whether or not they've done the wrong thing or not. So I can tell you for a fact, there are very, very few people at AFCA that like me because I abuse them and I get into conversations with them. But it is done because I will defend advisors. Okay? If we've done the wrong thing, then I'm happy to look at settling it. But there is far too many occasions where, and there's a whole industry out there of lawyers and semi-lawyers that have set themselves up simply to utilise the AFCA process to get money out of people. And, you know, Gary touched on it before. I nearly drove off the road. I was out one Saturday afternoon and a voice from AFCA that I recognised was on the radio advertising the fact that you can come along and speak to them and for free get your complaint against your financial planner or bank heard. And that's, you know, simply because during COVID and before COVID, after the Royal Commission, they amped up all the staff, they employed people everywhere, and then complaints dried up. They have about 80% of their complaints at the moment in the investments are purely about the Dixon Advisory. And they're not hearing any of them. They're just sitting there racking up fees because they're waiting for a compensation scheme of last resort because AFCA have said ASIC have said it's too hard for us. We're going to wipe our hand of it. So you go and complain to AFCA, and then when the compensation scheme of last resort comes in, you can get paid out through that because quite simply, you know, there's no money left to fund any complaints from Dixon. And so you're just getting, I think 17,000 complaints have come through. So it's just terrible. So if we leave it to AFCA to say who's got the clean record, we're really in strife. So the quality of advice review outcomes. 20 years of major reforms. 2002, FSR, and you just got to love the fact that we've got 3-letter acronyms, and the one that failed the most has got a 5-letter acronym. FSR, the Financial Services Reform Act. Good idea, again. Club 6, 1999 first up, 2002 became FSR, and it had an implementation date of 2004. And this was going to fix the entire industry. It was going to bring together the securities advisors and the life insurance brokers and put it all under a single thing. And we would go away from customer advice records, which had 4 pages, front page, details, the advice, what it cost, handwritten, and the client understood. Okay? But it was a simpler time too, because there weren't the same proliferation of products that there are now. Try saying that 3 times fast. But again, that failed because the self-interest groups, in this case the FPA, and the lawyers got involved, and we finished up, instead of going from a logical document, as the statement of advice was designed to be, we went to these 100-page monstrosities that had been put together by lawyers, and you know, they didn't work. I was working at the FPA in those days, and I was a subject matter expert on FSR, and I was going around and giving presentations to it. And even though I probably gave 200 presentations over a 2-year period, the day after the first came in, I had 4 life insurers, the old life ring me and say, what's this FSR thing? Because the life company has said I can no longer give advice on their behalf. So, you can educate and you can educate, but you don't get it through. FOPA, and you'll notice that there was a big gap, 2002 to 2013. FOPA was due to come out originally about 2008, 2009, because it was always due to be reviewed after the FSR. A little thing called the GFC got in the way, and so it didn't come in until 2013. And it brought some good changes, but it really, this is where you had people like Palmer and Jackie Landy and things like that stuffing around, and so you had a safe harbour test that nobody could actually pass, because the final point to it is anything that anybody can think of that you should have done or could have done or may have done, you should have done. And, so that didn't work. We then went to the FAR, which was ASIC's idea of how do I actually work out who it is that I am looking after. And you'll notice that, we're only still getting some 7 or 8 years later, we're only still now getting to mandatory reporting of some of the issues on the FAR register. It is still incomplete after 7 years. The LIF, the Life Insurance Framework, maybe if they had brought that in at GFC, it might have had some benefit. But I have been in the hard end of financial services for at least the last 4 decades. And I've been head of compliance and investigator for the last 30 years. I have seen 2 legitimate cases of churning. And yet we have an entire piece of legislation supposedly designed to stop churning, because it doesn't do anything else. And does it stop churning? Of course not. So, again, we're in the situation. And you've only got to look at the FSA over in England. I mean, they went through this a few years before us, and they had their insurance commissions cut, they had education standards improved, the advisors had to be separated from the product manufacturers, all the good things. But now, commissions on insurance in the UK are back around 150 to 200%, because England went through a massive underinsurance problem. Exactly the same thing. And you can ask any of the insurers. We are going through an underinsurance problem at the moment that is only going to grow and feed on itself, because if you can't afford to take out a policy, and you can't afford as an advisor to do the work to get the people set up in a policy, then the policy pool gets smaller, and in the end, the insurers then have to go to the FSC to change the rules to make it harder and to make it cheaper for the insurers. Okay, so we need to have a sensible approach to it, and I don't want to even talk about Basia, because that was a joke. Again, a self-interest group being the education lobby got together, and knowing nothing about business, just made changes. And there's a good reason why a lot of those will be changed over the next couple of years. Again, it's a good idea, and the basis for it makes sense, But when it gets left to self-interest groups to actually write the legislation, it finishes up a pile of horse rollers. The response to the Financial Services Royal Commission, again, some good things, but Interprac gave up conflicted remuneration and volume bonuses and all of that in 2006. So by the time the big thing about conflicted remuneration came through in 2021, we didn't have a great problem. It really was not, and again, it was legislation that was already 5 or 6 years out of date. And this is the real problem that we have at the moment. And with the CLAR, I mean, Michelle Levy went on a whole lot about the fact that she didn't hear anybody talking about aligning the client's interests. But hasn't she heard of best interest? I mean, how many people here are giving advice in their own interests rather than in the client's interests? We have had it drummed into us that we don't even need to think about it now. Okay? It is just so ingrained in our processes. So we'll have a look at some of the CLAR outcomes anyway. Quality financial advice is an aspirational target that is difficult to define. How many people here give poor quality advice? How many people give average quality advice? How many people here strive to give quality advice? How do you know? You don't. I mean, we have a whole range of things that turns around and says, you know, if the advice puts the client into a better position and that they are fully informed about it and the like, then it is quality advice. But it is awfully hard to define. Affordable financial advice is even harder to define, and it shouldn't be left to governments. So these are the three figures from the government. The industry funds, God bless their little souls, tell the government that consumers will only pay $350 to $500 for a statement of the price. The FSC turn around and say, oh, well, we say that most statements of advice cost between $1,500 and $2,900. And then they go to Ernst & Young, and Ernst & Young, who absolutely just live on ASIC's reviews and requirements and things, they turn around and say that it actually costs $5,000 to provide the advice that the industry fund says is only worth $350 to $500, and the FSC says we're only charging $1,500 to $2,900. So how can you have affordable financial advice being defined by a government when they can't even get the figures right? And accessible financial advice is probably the simplest to define, but also the most complex and hardest to implement. And, you know, the surveys indicate, and I sound like I should be, you know, someone on a game show here, surveys indicate 85% of clients want online financial technology, but then 69% of the industry don't provide and are unlikely to provide in the immediate future digital advice services. Why? Lack of demand, consumer preference, and compliance concerns being the stated impediments. So again, we've got, you know, one side of the survey saying that 85% want it, and the other side of it saying 69% of advisors say clients don't want it. And Philippe was talking about it, and he and I sort of had similar experiences when we've been over to the States. In 2018, when I was over there, everybody was talking about robo-advice. It was the big thing. Everybody wanted to be in robo-advice, and they were going to provide the full end-to-end service. So the one-stop shop, a client came in, got onto a screen and got advice out the other end. And that was the way it was going to be. Now, over there, they're not talking about robo-advice. It's gone by the window out there. Nobody talks about it anymore. What they're talking about is the data stack. So advice being a multi-layered and multi-functioned undertaking. And so the big companies over there are saying, well, we want to be the expert on the client engagement. And we're going to develop the best client engagement tool that we can, and that'll fit in at the bottom of the data stack. And somebody else is saying, well, we're going to improve the CRM, and we're going to have the best part so that you can get a data stack that includes the best quality CRM. And then somebody else is going to be about doing something and the other. So, this process of having the data stack, and it's one of the reasons why we've been engaging with Dash and Raw over the last 12 months, because the approach that they're taking is that their bit of that data stack will be the best, that they will go out and utilise and bring in the best other pieces to that data stack, because that's the way to go. And, it's a fundamental change that we have from, the old X plan. If it's not ours, we'll buy it. And, we want to be all things to all people at all times. So, getting that accessible financial advice will not be a situation of robo-advice, because robo-advice for investment purposes doesn't apply unless you turn it around and put the product at the top as being the entrance point to it, and then work it out at the bottom and do it on that sort of a pyramid, whereas it can work okay for insurance because the underlying products are all the same. But if you look at how many strategies there are and how many products there are that are available, robo-advice will not work for investment products. Oops. So, advice documents. Client proposal number 9. Providers of personal advice should be able to determine what form of advice would best suit their clients. Providers should be required to maintain complete records of the advice they provide and provide a written record of advice to that client on request, which would replace the SOA or the ROA. So we're going to have a written document to replace the current written documents. Be careful of what we wish for, okay? Demonstrating the advice may finish up to be more complicated and compliance written as the current advice documentation model is. Okay, it is far more simple to look at how we can develop the SOAs to be better, and that's what we're looking at. So, we did a Remington not that long ago. We looked at a company called Informed Investor, and we were offered to make use of that company, and we liked it so much that we finished up, we bought the company, because they are looking at the data stack and they are providing a piece to that data stack. And for that, it simply is that they take our APL and they will give us a link, they will give you BDS, and we're going to incorporate the TMD, and we're also looking at putting in the applicable research, and there will be a video interview with the portfolio manager or the thing, and that will be available on a single link. So think about when you're doing your advice document, rather than having to put in to paste all of this about the product and about the you know, in the attachments and the appendices and all of that, you'll be able to just have a single link page that provides that information to the client if they want to read it. Because let's face it, 90% of clients don't want it. Unless you've got a client base full of engineers and school teachers, they are not going to read the fine print. And even then, school teachers, I'm not quite sure, because I've got a daughter going to be a school teacher, I'm not quite sure that they can actually read. But if it's there in pictures, and if it's there with the interview with the portfolio manager, that is certainly stronger. And again, it will cut out a whole lot of the peripherals and the like. And so, you know, that's going to be a big development. And if we can do that for a range of other parts to the statement of advice, that is much better than turning around and saying, oh, we're going to scrap the SLA and we're just going to turn around and have a good advice document. That's just not going to work. Personal and general advice. So this was qua proposal number 1. The financial services regime should regulate the provision of personal advice, which will be broader than it applies today. So when you read through all of the rubbish, you can distill it to the major change is that simply holding information about the client's objectives, needs, or any aspect of their financial situation will trigger personal advice. Michelle Levy didn't need to do anything to come up with that. The courts decided that in the case against Westpac, and you know, the bar for progressing from general advice to personal advice is set so low that it's just simply a trip hazard now. I mean, there is no way that as an advisor we can be in the situation of giving general advice anymore. It just is not going to fit into the models of the future. And you know, I've been saying this for a number of years. I have turned around and you know, I had a number of advisors come to me and said, look, I'm not going to sit the Senior Advisor exam because I've been offered the role of a general advice licence, and so I'm just going to go general advice. So other than calling them stupid, I actually sat down and I went through the likely changes to it with them, and fortunately, all the 2 took me up on that and went on and successfully passed the Senior Advisor exam. And that's good news, because the 2 that have gone on to general advice will have a very, very limited lifetime in that process. And there will no longer, and so the regime will no longer regulate the provision of general advice. So, but general advice, which is no longer going to be called general advice and no longer part of the regime, will still be subject to consumer protections, such as false and misleading, conflicted remuneration regulations. So you won't actually be able to charge for it, and would need to be amended to include the new general advice, whatever that is going to be. File proposals 3 and 4. So a person who provides personal advice should provide good advice. Well, gee, ouch, really. Which will replace the current best interest duty? The appropriate advice duty, the duty to warn the client, the duty of priority in Chapter 7 of the Corporations Law. I mean, it's restating the bleeding obvious, but you know, this is what we already aimed at giving good advice. And you know, the people who are not giving good advice are not the financial planners and advisors that we see in groups like us. So it's pretty simple. But the personal advice provider should be a relevant provider and subject to the education and training standards regime. The kicker in this means that if you can no longer give general advice, and anybody who was previously in the process or in the basis of giving general advice, is now giving personal advice, they must be a relevant provider, which means that they must either have met the FASEA advisor exam and FASEA education standards, or be meeting the experience pathway. And, if all personal conversations held with a client are personal advice, then what happens to our friends, the brokers? We've got 38 brokers inside Sequoia, and the majority of them deal with wholesale clients or deal on an execution or general advice only basis. And there's going to need to be quite some changes be made to that program if these regulation changes come in. Factual information will still be included as able to be given, but if the recommendation or opinion, which is designed or likely to influence a person to make a decision about a financial product or class of financial product. And again, here, the kicker is in the detail. Class of financial product. If you were an accountant, you could previously talk about an asset class because that was considered to be outside of the financial product, because you weren't talking about an actual product, but you were talking about Australian equities as a group, or you were talking about direct shares as a group, or the other asset classes. Under this, those will again be classified as a financial product or class of product and will be captured under this regime. So our limited advice advisors who are accountants will also need to come across to the personal advice regime if these proposals get up as recommended. General advice case study. So we had a general advice only business, and it was set up, they were authorised only to provide general advice, and effectively what they did was that they provided their clients twice daily with investment market view, their house view of the investment markets, and they had a range of representatives who could execute the transactions that the clients wanted. A client was successfully trading until COVID and the market fall in March 2020. And I might add that this same firm, their house view was at the very, very start of COVID, and before the market had fallen more than a couple of percent, their recommendation was that clients should lighten their portfolio by 50%. So, they had done the right thing. The client panicked and required the business to sell down the entire portfolio in early April 2020 at nearly the bottom, and that locked in a market loss. The client complained to APCA, and the original ruling by the case manager, and I've got to tell you, and my wife is here today because she used to hear telephone conversations with this particular case manager. And I reckon I had about 40 of them over the time, because he went through every single transaction. He went through every single decision, every single recording, everything that we had. And I should have known, because when he started off and he said, I was once a stockbroker, I should have turned around and said, can somebody else hear the case, because you know nothing. But I didn't, he didn't. And the original ruling in the case manager was in our favour, as it should have been. There was clear evidence that it was the client's instruction against the best, or against the general advice that they were giving to all of their clients to hold at that stage, because the market was pretty down. The case proceeded to panel, And the decision, surprise, surprise, went against the act itself. On the basis of excessive trading. Something not brought into it in the original complaint, but the case manager, who was a communist, was his whole role in life is to turn around and rip money out of AFSLs and advisors and hand it over to the proletariat that complained to him. And I've got to say, this particular one I have had so many arguments with, and he was also the ombudsman that was found to be at fault in the Royal Commission, not the Royal Commission, the test case against AFCA, the DH Flinders. But, you know, he wouldn't define for me what excessive trading was, and he couldn't say where excessive trading came into corporations law or anything else like that. But his most important argument in his eyes was that whilst he was forced to acknowledge and did acknowledge that the group had only ever provided general advice, that every conversation with the client commenced with the invocation that only general advice was being given, and that the instructions that caused the loss were solely driven by the client themselves. He found that the nature of the advice was inappropriate because the advisor, in giving general advice, had failed to take into account the personal circumstance of the client that was allegedly provided, and it was allegedly provided in an email on Christmas Eve that was never ever received by the advisor, and that the client themselves could no longer locate because it must have been deleted. But yet they gave it, all right. And so that vital piece of personal information was then deemed to make general advice taken into account. So, you know, we wonder why we struggle to win cases at AFCA, and this is the very reason. You know, you can have everything lined up on your side, and then you get a communist at the top who turns around and makes the changes. It is almost impossible to protect ourselves against idiotic decisions made by an ombudsman who is not subject to oversight or review, and that's the real problem. You know, we would have needed to spend $300,000 to go to the federal court in a matter like this, and whilst we would have won, the only option that they have open to them in a case like this is to turn around and have the matter referred back to AFCA. So they get told that they've done the wrong thing, but they then got to rehear it themselves anyway. So, you know, that doesn't really make sense. The Westpac decision has set the bar ridiculously low for personal advice. The general advice warning and client declaration can only go so far, and it doesn't provide complete protection. But the key takeaway for this has to be that where a client makes a decision that can turn out badly, extra file notes of any discussions about that decision need to be made. And this was the problem that we had. Yes, the client obviously was the one that rang in and said, I want you to sell all the checks, I want you to sell all of the shares that you hold. And there were no records to say other than that on the same day their investment panel had said, oh, we think, you know, this is the current position of the market. Our general advice remains that you should still stay in the market. Had there been better file notes and what they said that they said to the client recorded, then it would have been maybe a different case. But the real kicker is that fortunately, the client also didn't accept the decision. They wanted more money. And so they declined the decision against us. So we would wait to hear more. I would suggest that they're doing the round of no win, no fee lawyers. And, you know, one or two things will happen. Most likely they will be told by the no win, no fee that if you want us to prosecute this, we'll have to charge you a fee. Or secondly, if it goes to court, you know, we should win it, and that's the case. But you know, take it from this that when you have a discussion with a client that they go the opposite way and it can turn out badly for them, you need to thoroughly record everything that was said to them, because they're the sort of ones that then come back to bite you in the end. ASIC and regulation changes issues. So OP 277 comes into effect. Okay, it's all there. The key to it is that RG 277 is only where there is a remediation program ordered or entered into as a result of discussion with ASIC. It doesn't apply, for example, on an IDR scheme or anything else like that. So from our point of view, and it's not retrospective, it's only after the 29th of September. But should we get a remediation program in place 2 months down the track, that remediation program can go back 10 years. Just ask ANB and ANZ and all the others. The big thing is that you know, one of the bits of feedback I hear from my compliance managers when they're out talking and doing reviews with advisors is, oh, well, you know, what does it really mean? You know, they're going to change the rules in regard to FPS. They're going to change all of this. You know, what I might have just forgotten one or two or something like that. We don't want to be subject to a remediation program. Okay. Ask Phil what the last one that he was with, $500,000 just to administer it. And if it's one that gets ordered by ASIC and they impose upon you the use of one of the big four, that $500,000 can become $2.5 million just to administer it, because it's a free for all for everybody. Okay, so you know we want to avoid it, and we have less likely to avoid it because we don't have product. Okay, we're not putting clients into our own products and things like that. But if we don't do the FBSs, if we don't do OSAs and the like, then that fee for no service that has been the bane of the existence for so many AFSLs out there could come and bite us, and regulation 277. So, you know, what it effectively means is that if you cannot work out the exact figure, you have to overcompensate the client rather than run the risk of undercompensating any clients. TMDs. So proposal 11 of the FAR recommends that personal advice will effectively cut out the need for TMDs other than for, sorry, not TMDs, for significant dealing reports other than where there is a complaint. In the last 12 months, I've received hundreds of SDRs and not one of them has ever required escalation to the product manufacturer. And I'm sort of hopeful that the choir will actually repeal the need for them. But in the meantime, they still need to be sent in, because we've already seen, you know, there's been 7, I think, AFSLs that have been targeted for TMDs that haven't met the standard, and so they've been banned from using those. And ASIC are looking at the DDOs and TMDs to make sure that these things are happening. Advisors still need to review the TMD for new investments, and where the advice is outside the intended TMD needs to be included in the significant dealing report. Now, some examples. A PPS insurance policy requiring personal advice to be given is provided under general or factual advice only. This needs an SDR. No ifs, no buts, and it is also one that would need to be escalated to the product manufacturer as well. Okay? Because the product manufacturer has said that the PPS insurance product can only be sold under personal advice. Go against that, SDR. A client with a 12-month investment horizon being invested in both products suitable for only medium term, 3 years plus, SDR, yes. Now, this is one of those ones that I would then look at, and I would look at the circumstances and what part that 12-month investment horizon played in it, what part the product actually played on it, and normally that would never be one that needs to be escalated, but it still must be provided at this stage. And a client invested in a growth product that doesn't pay income when that product makes up a portion of the client's growth, part of a balanced portfolio and the overall portfolio needs SDR, no. If it's just the portion of it and it's missing on one thing, and in this particular case it was the income part of it, if the rest of the portfolio meets the income requirement, then it doesn't need to have an SDR. Okay? We're all clear on that? There's some nodding heads, there's some asleep. No, okay, right? Other ASIC targets. You can sign up to get the ASIC media releases. It's always a bit of fun. They can throw a dark cloud on a sunshiny day anytime you like, but they're probably worthwhile getting. So, securities lending, complex and against efficiently, honestly, and fairly obligation. There are securities, or there are shadow brokers out there that take the stocks that are lodged with them by other advisors and use that as security or loans that they on lend. Okay? You don't want to be, we don't allow it. You don't want to be involved in that. ASIC don't want you to be involved in that. The same with crypto assets. Offering crypto assets to a trading app gives them an order of safety, and we don't allow advice in regard to crypto assets to be given. I mean, we got approached by a friend of Interprax and someone who's been, and he set up a fund that was dealing in crypto assets and supposedly adding a veneer of respectability to and certainly the crypto assets. He's just been, well, that fund's sort of been done and suspended, because how can you write a TMD that fully covers all of the risks of crypto assets and still allows people to invest in it? And I say to advisors when they say, "Oh, well, what do I say if somebody wants to, invest in crypto? How do I give them an investment that matches it?" I turn around and I say, "Well, go around week 4, 6, grade 7, doesn't matter what day, just keep on backing 4, 6 in grade 7, and you've got about as much chance as investing in crypto assets." And the other one is offering zero or low cost brokerage when the true cost is masked. ASIC's concerned that claims are zero, and so there's one out there that they claim no cost broking, but all of the money that goes into the CMAs that they require to have set up at a bank to fund the share purchases, who gets the interest on that money? The broker does. Doesn't go to the investor. And so when you think that under their license, they've got $40 million of free cash sitting in a bank earning them interest, they can afford to give you brokerage money. So you just got to be wary of these offers of low or no cost broking, because they may not be true to label. We have a group that they're not associated with, they're clients of Morrison's, our securities broker called Open Invest, and they actually don't charge brokerage because they operate mainly on SMAs, and they charge a low fee, and that fee actually covers the brokerage that would be charged for the minimal transactions needed on an SMA. So they're not the ones that ASIC are after at all, and we support those. Cyber security. We've all seen the fallout from Optus and from RI Investments and now Medibank. Three levels that you need to understand. So the AFSL level, we maintain a cyber policy. We've got external cyber security protection and monitoring service. We hold cyber attack insurance, and we provide regular training on our cyber security staff. And we all laugh about it. I mean, whilst I was over in Perth, I had to sit and do the phishing exercise to teach me how to avoid phishing email. That's fine. But again, if we are ever tested by ASIC as to what our response is, we carry out cyber security training at a range of levels to all of our staff. And certainly at the Xplan and ABL CRM, they're responsible for maintaining the client data and have the protocols and systems in place and are responsible for looking after your client records. If you use accounting or a proprietary software or a CRM, then you need to understand the risk. That's your risk that you've got to carry for cyber security. Cyber security in you, the third level, and what you take responsibility for is your business systems and procedures. How we can help. In effect, general insurance, we can provide access to smarter cyber insurance. Okay, if you want to quote, ring your compliance manager and they'll put you on to Interfact General Insurance, and they've got the policy for you. But first, review your business insurance to see what protections that they can offer and that policy offers. Now, lately, most of the policies have cyber security as an exclusion rather than inclusion, but some of the better policies and the longer term policies still have it as an inclusion. And we've got a checklist of the safeguards which we follow to identify how many of the safeguards you've got in place and we should consider. Consider your current processes. Be aware, if you're using an offshore remote paraplanner, that they only have the access that is needed on a local server or a properly set up on financial planning software. Don't give them your bloody login, okay? You've got to get a dedicated login or ensure that they've got a dedicated login, because it's just, there's too much risk involved. Be aware of departing staff who may have a grudge. It would appear that both the Telstra and the Optus breaches were internally done by staff who had a grudge. Consider cyber insurance, and you can contact us for a referral. The big issue is that COVID and the rapidly and haphazardly set up websites have led to a lot of people being vulnerable. So consider who has access to what through your website. And here's your checklist. daily backups of data, business critical information with regular testing of the backup. No good backing it up if you can't get it back out again. Use password manager programs. Enable multi-factor authentication. I hate multi-factor authentication because it always comes through. The phone's in one room, I'm in another room, and then I need my glasses are in a third room because I can't read my phone without the glasses. But again, it is going to be more and more and more required, and so you should be enabled. Test the business continuity and disaster recovery plan and know the difference between the two. Business continuity is about how you will physically continue your business if you get flooded out, rained out, bombed out, whatever. And disaster recovery is generally more about what happens if you get your IT system blocked or you can't, you can no longer go on. Antivirus software, don't skip over the message for 20 days in a row to say that it's out of date. Make sure that you've got firewalls, intrusion prevention and detection systems. Limit the access to those who need it only. Okay? Don't share your passwords. Have written data security policies. Even for a small firm, you need to have something in writing as to how you handle your cyber security and the annual security awareness training. And finally, Austrac. Out of all of the things with Austrac, financial planning, we have two main obligations. The initial one-off identification of clients, we need to hold the documents used, they must be certified, and we cannot certify remotely. So, okay, this is where we get into confusion. You can identify somebody remotely over Zoom when they hold up their passport or their driver's license, and you go, yes, that looks like the mug, both of them. But you cannot then take that document, have it sent to you, and certify it. Okay? So identification, yes. Certification, no. It still needs to be, you still need to see the original document to certify that the copy that you are signing and certifying is a real copy. And the answer is, tell them to go and get the copy of it certified at the police station, the chemist, any of the other places, the library, any of the other places that will do it, because you cannot do it remotely. And complete the relevant AML ID form or multiples, because if you're dealing with a person who is the member, the trustee, and operates a corporate trustee, you may need to identify them 3 times. I've seen clients who needed to be identified 4 times because they're also the person giving instructions on behalf of a corporate entity as well. Ongoing suspicious matter reporting. You don't need to be Inspector Clouseau. However, you've got an obligation to report through your designated AML CTF, and it's not me for once. I looked in my cupboard of packs, and that one was missing because I remember I gave it to Peter Ho. So Peter Ho from Sequoia is our designated AML CTF officer, but you can get access to him through your compliance manager. The obligation is not to investigate, but just to report if it's suspicious. Maybe the identification doesn't match, or questions asked in the engagement is suspicious. And the Austrac websites contain the information about the financial red claim. Application fact find. The client states their employment is a sales rep for Coke, but the identification is a probationary license. Okay? Coca-Cola, as sales rep, will only hire people with full licenses. Client claims to have lived in a Victorian address for 5 years, but provides a Northern Territory driver's license. When I was a fraud investigator last century, and that's it. 80% of Northern Territory driver's licences presented as ID outside of the Northern Territory were fake. Why? Because most people wouldn't know what a Northern Territory driver's licence looked like if it jumped up and bit them on the nose. And I'd hoped for this to find my little file that contains fraudulent licences, bank cheques, and other documents that I kept from previous jobs. But I would defy you, other than the fact that it's now out of date, to tell which was the forged Victorian driver's licence. And this is a big one in the current circumstances with account-based pensions and funding overstayers. So, there's a whole cadre of people who were in Australia prior to the COVID who should have left but haven't, and so they are now overstayers. They have no visa to stay here, and they are being funded by other members of the community because they can't have their own bank accounts, they can't really do things like that. And one of the ways that they do it is through an account-based pension, because they will use clean money, set up an account-based pension, have the money go into an unknown bank account that's not theirs, where there's a credit card or a debit card attached to it, and the person who is being funded to stay illegally accesses the money through the debit card. And, that's counter-terrorism financing or money laundering 101. So beware if you're being asked to set up a payment into an unknown bank account. Or the client has a number of large luxury items listed as assets with no loans or current means of funding. Or has and I say this in Victoria, they come from Greenvale, because Greenvale is the house or the suburb that marijuana built. It's one little suburb that's surrounded by a lot of shitty other suburbs, and this is one suburb that has multi-million-dollar houses. There's more Ferraris per square mile than anything else, and it was all based on drug money. And if you ever had a Greenvale customer, you would probably suspect that they were doing something illegal. So the types of financial crime prevalent: money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, pyramid finance, cyber-enabled fraud, and welfare fraud. Questions?
I want to ask about that ID.
Yep.
You were able to do that at one stage, were you not? For a year or something?
You can identify which there was a COVID exemption put for the last resort for the little old lady who was confined to a house nowhere near Modern Man, that you could actually make some arrangements, but that's gone by the wayside. So the identification of the person still stands, for certain circumstances, but certification of documents cannot be done remotely. So mortgage loans and things like that, where they're signing a document in that regard, because you're being asked to identify the person, not the document. Yeah.
How many pages do you think good advice so I agree?
If I write it, it'd be 6 pages. If a lawyer wrote it, it'd be 66 pages. And if someone from ASIC wrote it, it wouldn't exist. And if somebody from ACTA wrote it, it'd be 900 pages.
I hope it's
Will the PI accept an SOA?
Sorry?
Will the professional indemnity accept the SOA?
Yes. So professional indemnity, and every year I have meetings with our professional indemnity insurer, and we go through all of these things. And he asks, and our auditors at the moment are going through and signing off on the FS 71 for the audit. And they go through our SOA documents. And you'll notice that over the last, well, those have been with us for a number of years, you'll notice that we've been gradually shrinking them and making them try and look less imposing to the clients. But the aim is to get them down to a level where the client actually is prepared to read it and not use it as a doorstop. But yes, the PI insurer will. And then did you have a question from the
Yes.
dark distant? Hello out there.
You can't certify documents remotely in the traditional sense, but what about services like DVS and Rapid ID? The ATO verifies documents using platform.
Yeah, but they're not us. And that's the answer to it. So the government will make exceptions for certain cases to do identification of people and the like. But if you want a passport or something like that, you've got to trundle along to the post office, and certainly for financial planners, you need to be citing the original document in that. So we're not going down that digital path at the moment, and there's no plans for it. You want to kick me off, don't you?
Yes.
So just before I finish, please just make sure, and I've been pleased to see the number of people who've been contributing, and when you're filling out my presentation, it's E for excellent, but please, and if you've got any feedback on what you would like to see in the sessions, please do it so that we can improve them. And I'll hand over to Sharon to close.
Thank you. So once again, thank you all for taking the time and spending the day with us. And like Michael said, please provide honest feedback about things that you would like to see going forward.
Except in my case where it can be dishonest.
Now, we head downstairs now and have a few drinks and have a few snacks, but I'm just going to announce who is going to get the books. So if you come and see me before you head downstairs. So to start off, upstairs, sorry, my sense of direction, wrong way, upstairs. I'm starting off with Glenn because you asked the first question of the day. So I think that takes bravery to ask the first question of the day. Also have got Lee, just because when he was asked the question about the money being printed, I was actually thinking of it. So I like that question. And then he just asked one about good advice. Also, Robert, I was thinking about mortgage stress when Latrobe was up here and what was going to happen if we had a heap of defaults. So he sort of took the words out of my mouth. So that was a good question. Then I'd also, Rod asked a couple of questions early on, and I think it's always good when a couple of people do. And then Steph just left, but he asked a couple of questions as well. So I've got something for him as well. So if you come and see me before you head upstairs. Okay, I look forward to seeing you upstairs later. Thank you.